He's a published historian and a nationally recognized specialist in cultural property law and investigations, where he occasionally worked undercover cultural property cases with both the NPS and the FBI. Over the years, he's been directly involved in some of the most interesting and controversial cultural property law matters that have occurred inside of the United States. A couple of cases which he's going to talk with us about tonight. So let's give a big welcome to Bob Palmer.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. Yeah, that's who I am. I started out growing up in Almaquee County and never really thought I would go to Luther College, but I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But what I would like to cover tonight is, this is kind of a two-part thing. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of world prehistory, and then we're going to get kind of to modern times. When I say modern times, I mean the last few thousand years. And then we will talk about some things that have happened more recent than that, ending up with a couple of true stories that involved individuals from Luther College and were pretty significant on a number of levels. As we go through and as I do this, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm not a great one for standing up here behind a lectern, so I'm going to be wandering around. And if you have any questions, feel free to just ask them. So the photograph here, that's from April 26, 1987. That's me, much thinner, much younger, much more hair on the top of my head. On the first day of my first day as a National Park Ranger, going to work at Effigy Mounds National Monument. Now, the significance of this is, when I was growing up, when I was in high school, that is all I ever wanted to do. I just wanted to be a ranger at Effigy Mounds. And I got to do that. But then fate and life intervened, and it became much, much more interesting. And I want to talk to you about some of that at the end, because some of that applies to all of us in here. That life sometimes doesn't go the path that you expect, but it can be really interesting. So, moving on. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. I want you to think about that, because that is what we're going to talk about when we talk about cultural resources. So what are cultural resources? I want you to think of them as basically just the fruits of culture. They're the byproducts of our ability as humans, our soaring and incredible ability for abstract thought. Given enough time, we can come up with some of the most interesting things. We can do some of the most interesting things that is imaginable. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, let's go back. These are very simple tools, and they're some of the earliest tools by some of our ancestors. Part of our family is that these are Acheulean hand axes made by Homo erectus. 8 million years ago, there were over a dozen hominids, people that were related to us. And early on, or at least 2 million years ago, people started to make things and create things to make their lives easier. So humans started to, as they came out of Africa, started to find their way elsewhere into the area shown here, into what's now Egypt and Saudi Arabia, Israel. But what's interesting about that is about 135,000 years ago, archaeologists find that there are distinct assemblages, distinct groupings of tools. Everything isn't the same. But at that same time, language abilities start. So what you're starting to see are people developing languages, people communicating, people developing tools that are good to be used in the areas where they're from. So there's going to be variability. And so this was a big moment when this started to happen. So people eventually went out of Africa, went out across Asia, and at 65,000 years ago, that's the earliest record of people going to sea. This was when people went to Australia. Now, what this map is, this is a really cool map. This was done by a guy named Joseph Birdsell in 1977, and what this depicts is islands of invisibility to get to Australia. So during one of the glacial epochs, when the sea levels were low, you can see that the continent of Australia was much bigger than it is today. Like this is Papua New Guinea here, and this is Southeast Asia. And so what Birdsell figured out is that if you were to go out on a boat, in some of these places you can see land. Other places you might not be able to see land if you went out on a boat. But if you go out a certain distance and you can still see land behind you, you can see land in front of you. And people figured that out. And by doing that, they managed to make their way to Australia 65,000 years ago. So these are the earliest seafarers in the world, long time ago. Here's some of the creatures that they found, like a giant kangaroo, giant wombat, a variety, giant cassowary, a variety of things that no longer exist today. I want you to think about that. Why do you suppose these things went extinct? I don't want you to answer that yet, but I want you to think about that. Why do you think these creatures went extinct after being there for millions of years? Okay, so let's go to Europe. And in Europe, about 37,000 years ago, we find the first records or recordings of rock art. But these weren't made by Homo sapiens. These were made by Homo neanderthalis, who are relatives of ours. And as what's been discovered in the last 20 years, is that they're closer relatives to us than we thought, and that there's genetics in our gene pool that came from Neanderthals, and that for most of the time of archaeologists studying this sort of thing wasn't thought to be true. So they were like the first rock art people. Then in Australia, 28,000 years ago, you start to find rock art there as well. And has anybody recognized this image? You know where it's at? Yes. Where's that at? That's in France. There's several images I have here of that. Animals that later on became extinct in Europe, but there was early 20,000 years ago, people were making images of that. Okay, so we've got people in Europe, we've got people in Africa, we've got people in Australia, we've got people in Asia. Now we're going to go and see if we can get people in North America. So the story goes, when I was a student here, I had a professor named Dale Henning, which some of you would remember. And the story at the time was that humans who were living in Asia came across what was known as Beringia, a land bridge between North America and Asia, and then made their way down an ice-free corridor into North America. I think that's nonsense. I don't think that's true. What do we know in our just brief time together about people in water? We can actually go to sea. We can actually travel on the water. So what's more likely, I believe, to be the case, and I think they're coming to this conclusion, is instead of finding some ice-free corridor, which wouldn't have had any food, it would have been a long, long ways to go with nothing and not knowing what you're going to. Instead, probably coming down along the west coast of North America and into North America. So by probably about 15,000 years ago, there were people in North America. So, what did they find in North America? They found mammoths, mastodons, camel, ground sloth, saber-toothed cat. Where's he at? Right there. All these things that are now gone. So, what caused them to go extinct, do you think? Yeah. Change in food source, perhaps. You have it happening in Australia, and you have it happening in North America. Any other ideas? Yes? Overhunting. That's a really good idea. That you have people coming into an area and hunting these large land mammals to extinction. So, if that's the case, I have a question for you. We still have large land mammals like that in Africa. Why? But stick with your original idea and think this through. What is different about Africa and North America and Australia? Yes? I think you're probably pretty close, and it could be some other things too. But yes, that's a really key point. In that, I wish I had a bag of candy. I'd throw you out one right now. That's a really key point in that these species did not co-evolve with humans. They evolved on their own, and then when you introduced humans into the equation, they disappeared. Okay, so I'm looking around. Many of you are wearing blue jeans. This, more likely than not, is a piece of a pair of very old blue jeans dating back about 6,000 years. It was dyed with indigo, found in South America. So at that point, we find archaeological evidence of people taking the environment that's around them, using the things that they find, and adapting them to their lives to make their lives better. An early example, what is this? Anybody? I heard it. What is it? Hieroglyphics. And what are hieroglyphics? Okay, like an Egyptian text. So, and then what is this? Anybody? Yes. Okay. These are very early forms of writing, dating back about 5,000 years. Now, a question for you. If you're writing something down 5,000 years ago, what would you want to write down? What would you be recording? Yes? Your name? Yes, you find that in these records, but what else besides your name would you want to write down? And let me give you a clue. Remember the first thing I said, that the past is a foreign country, they do things differently there? This is the one exception. This is the one exception. So governments are going to be writing things down, yes. Yes, tax records. The IRS of 5,000 years ago. One of the earliest things that was recorded was recording what people owed and recording what tribute had to be paid. So excellent, very good. All right. So now we're moving further out into, we're going to move out into the Pacific. So we've now settled South America, North America, Australia, Africa, Europe, Asia, and now the hardest place on earth to travel, the South Pacific. So what do we know about this? Well, first of all, it's a pretty cool place. But if you're going to explore, what's one thing that you want to make sure that if you don't find land, what would you really like to do? If you don't find anything out in the ocean, what would be really nice? Going back, yes. So you'll look at some of the images, like in the early 20th century, of some artists depicting the settlement of New Zealand. George Turner, he's a Kiwi from Auckland. Have you ever been to the Auckland War Memorial Museum? Seen Goldie's, some of Goldie's paintings and things like that? When you go home, I'm going to tell your dad, that's on the top of the list. That's something you need to do. So, but there's some of these pictures that are depicting Polynesian people discovering lands, and they're on a ship, and they're just the paintings. These people are emaciated, and they're like at the edge of death, and then you see like the sun in the distance, and there's this bit of land, and they're like pointing at it like they've been saved. That is vastly underestimating Polynesians and Micronesian people. I mean, unbelievably so. So here's the key. You want to go home if you don't find anything. So up here, you see these dates. These are the oldest dates. And so what you found was that this area, basically from Fiji back to Papua New Guinea, was considered a sailing nursery. People developed their skills in this area over generations. They figured out how to sail. And one of the most important things is that if you're going to go out sailing and looking for things, you want to go out and you'll tack back and forth into the wind using the stars, using the sea currents to basically navigate, making your way out. And if you don't find anything, you turn the boat around and you've got the wind at your back and you go home. And then restock and you try again. So what you can see are the dates going out into the Pacific gets more and more recent. So you would think Easter Island is the furthest away from, say, Fiji or Samoa, that would be the last place settled. No, that's not how it works. Because that is a pretty easy, relatively speaking, that's an easy trip. You go out there, you turn around, you ride back. It's when you have to go against, across, and downwind that's difficult. That's really hard to do that. As a result, the last major landmass on the face of the earth to be settled was New Zealand at about 1100 AD. There's a site right down in here called Shagmouth, or Shag River, yeah, it's at Shag River, that has, archaeologists found a couple of fish hooks with shells from up in the Pacific, like from up in Tonga, Samoa, that were brought down. So it's believed to be probably one of the earliest, if not the earliest settlement in New Zealand. So last major landmass to be settled. So there we are. We've made it. We've basically settled the entire planet over thousands of years, New Zealand being the last place because it's the hardest place to get to. Who cares? Why do we worry about this? Why are people interested in this? What difference does this make? What difference does it make to your life? Why should you care? Okay, I promise, how many of you are math majors? How many are definitely not math majors? Okay, this is for you. This is the only equation that you're going to see in any program I will ever give. And this relates to why we care. So there's three things here. R, what does R represent? R represents recreation. So we have these places that we preserve these things. We go to see them, but we also recreate. You know, if you go to Grand Canyon National Park because you're interested in geology, and you hike to the bottom of the canyon, or even partway to the bottom of the canyon, partway is all that I didn't get to the bottom, as my wife will attest. It is one hell of a walk, but it's recreation. So you go there, you see these things, and as a ranger, I used to experience this all the time. People come out to a park, and they would have this experience. They'd come and they'd say something to me. They'd say, you know what? The recreational values here in this place are phenomenal. I'm so glad we have these national parks because of what they bring to us as recreation. You know, that's kind of a cool thing, but then it's something that made me a little uncomfortable, because how else can you recreate? You can go to Disneyland. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Disneyland at all, but that's a form of recreation. So do we need these areas? Think about that. SB, scenic beauty. How many of you have been to Yosemite National Park? When you come, did you go through the tunnel where you can see El Capitan off in the distance? It's just like, holy smokes. It is serendipitous to see that. You go to other places. You walk up to the top of Effigy Mounds and look out over the Mississippi River Valley. You can have that same experience. People would say, the scenic beauty of this park makes it worth having. But again, I'm a little uncomfortable with that too. Because what is that? What is scenic beauty? You know, some people find scenic beauty in the skyline of Chicago or New York. That's fine. That's cool. But I don't know if that's a good thing to hang our hat on as far as why we have these areas. So the last one is economics. And here is if you go to these special places and you go to the communities that are just outside them and you stay in a hotel or you go to a restaurant or you buy something, they're going to talk to you about the economic value of the park and the economic return that they see from all of the tourists that come there. And that makes me a little nervous when people talk about having these areas for those reasons. Because you know what? Some of these parks, you can cut all the trees down and you can say that's economic gain as well. You don't get to look at the trees, but it's economic gain. So, recreation, scenic beauty, economics. And I'm telling you, you got to be careful about these things. So what is it that I think you should be thinking about? So I just want to ask you guys a question. Let me put it to you this way. If your life kind of unfolds somewhat like mine, you'll find someone to share your life with. Sooner or later, during that journey, probably late at night, that important person to you is probably going to be laying right next to you. And at 2 in the morning, they're going to wake you up. And they're going to say, honey, why do you love me? Why do you love me? 3 answers I found that don't work are recreation, scenic beauty, and economics. If you go that path, you will be sleeping on the couch. If you're lucky, maybe outside, I don't know. But that's a real interesting thing. What is it about someone? And what is it about some place? Some place have unexplained influences on you. They make you who you are. They can make you better than who you have been. And if you're a music fan, and anybody here know The Who? Okay, there's some people. Okay, there's a line in one of their songs, 1 and 1 doesn't make 2, 1 and 1 makes 1. Well, sometimes that's true, that the 2 become much stronger as 1. So think about these areas and how they can add to your life through a lens like that. It becomes pretty interesting. Now, let's take a little journey. Let's make this a little closer to home, relatively speaking. Anybody recognize this? What's that? So look on the sides. What do you see? I think I heard somebody say what it was. It's a prison. It's what? Alcatraz. Yes, this is, everybody know what Alcatraz is? It's a prison on an island out in the harbor in San Francisco. It's a really interesting place. You go there, this little boy has got a set of headphones on. They give everybody a set of headphones, and as you walk through the prison, you can hear the stories of that prison. And it's a really remarkable experience. That's our son Hayden back when he was just a wee little boy. You're gonna see my kids. I mean, what do you expect? It's my program. So, so that's at Alcatraz. So that's an experience that you have. Now here's this. Anybody recognize this? If you're a history major, you might. Yes. Is that what? Sorry. It is not. It's someplace in the eastern United States. What's that? Gettysburg. There was a battle there during the American Civil War. We have a national park site there. Now, there's about 1.6 million people visit that place every year. How many of those do you think have direct lineal descendants, or are direct lineal descendants of somebody that fought in that battle? Probably quite a few. I mean, there's going to be a lot, but not everybody. How about this? Anybody recognize that? Mesa Verde, yes. About 500,000 visitors a year. How many of those visitors do you think are direct lineal descendants of the people that built these cliff dwellings? Really low. But yet people go there. People find them interesting. And we preserve them. Again, I promised you pictures of my kids. There you go. Some of you might know my son Cody. He's a junior. You can see some heads nodding. That's Cody right there. Who was it that was talking about Riley earlier? There's young Riley. Yeah, he's so this is down in Arizona. This is one of the cliff dwelling sites. Okay, so what do? We preserve things that interpret and talk about ancient lifeways, things that relate to epic struggles and fantastic adventures. Anybody know what this is all about? Grand Canyon, there was a guy named John Wesley Powell. He made the first trip down the Grand Canyon in the 1800s, and this is meant to represent that. And they interpret that at the Grand Canyon National Park. Here's one. Now this is really an American question. If you're, this shows you the tapestry of this country through many different things, and it relates to one person. Does anybody know where this is or who this belonged to? I'll give you a few clues. The person really liked golf. This is in their backyard. They were a 5-star general. Anybody? Eisenhower. Yes, this is the Eisenhower home just outside of Gettysburg National Park. You go there, you get to see what Ike did after he retired, and it's a really cool place. They've got like his car in this glass garage. You can see Eisenhower's car. If you're into that sort of thing, it's pretty cool. So we preserve this. We preserve things about Eisenhower. But you know what else we do? We preserve things that speak of our dark side. This is one of the coolest national monuments you could ever visit. This is in western South Dakota. It's called Minuteman Missile National Historical Park. And what it is it's a missile silo complete with an underground bunker that 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, there were 2 people sitting in there strapped in like they were in airplane seats at a terminal waiting to push the button to end everything you've ever known, thought, or dreamed of. This represents the end. This represents our ending. But guess what? We've chosen not to go there. Think about the technology that's involved in this. That you could launch a missile out of South Dakota with the Earth spinning around at 1,000 miles an hour, and you could land it on Moscow. The ability to do that is just hard to comprehend. On the other hand, the thought that we would even consider doing something is also difficult to comprehend. But every day, just tomorrow, just today, just the next day, we choose not to do that. We choose to live. And that, to me, I think speaks about what we're capable of as a future. Now, here's some images. Does anybody know what this represents? It's a book. Anybody? Yes. Yes, H.G. Wells' Time Machine. Okay. How about these things here? Where are they from? Easter Island. Good, good. This guy. Captain Kirk from the Starship Enterprise. Right. Okay, then this thing, I don't expect anybody know what that is, where that's from? The New Albin tablet. Yes. Another piece of candy, if I had it, would go to you. It's a catlinite tablet or pipestone. The material came from southwestern Minnesota. It was found when someone was excavating a house basement in 1912. It just fell out of the wall. Nothing else with it, just that. So what did these things have in common? Well, I want you to think about this. If I had a time machine and I could travel into the future, and people would ask me about our lives today and about the past, I have a feeling the questions would not be quite what I would expect. In thinking this through a lot, I think the questions they would ask is, what were you guys doing? Why didn't you save more of this? Why didn't you save more of who we are as a species? Now, it's easy to understand why you would want to save this. That's really simple. But something like this, You know, Aldo Leopold once said the first law of intelligent tinkering is to save all of the pieces. And now we're going to talk about some of those pieces. Another really, really cool place. If you guys get a chance to go to California, probably most of you are going there next week on spring break, right? Of course you are, yes? No. You're going somewhere maybe more interesting, or you're going home. This is just north of San Francisco at Point Reyes National Seashore. And it's the KPH radio station. So what's significant about this? Well, it's kind of cool in that today it's the last place in North America that you have people that send out Morse code messages. There's volunteers that are there that do this. It was officially retired in like 1992, but you have volunteers that still run this. But here's the significant part of this. This facility was fully operational and was working and was staffed on the morning of December 7th, 1941. When Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese, the first message to North America came into that building. Think about this. You're the person on the Morse code taking this message in, and you're getting a message that Pearl Harbor is under attack in the Hawaiian territories. And you know before anybody else that the world as you know it has completely changed. You can go there and you can see, you can sit in the chair in that room where that took place. And that can be a kind of a powerful experience if you are into this sort of thing. So that's a pretty cool place. Now I want to tell you another story. Just one more story like this, then we'll talk about some personal stuff. I want to tell you a story of a guy named George Dixon. So George Dixon was from Kentucky. He was born in 1832, I'm not sure, 32, 36, 1837, I beg your pardon. And Mr. Dixon had a girlfriend named Queenie Davis. Now, Dixon decided that he would go off, maybe decided is a soft term, but Dixon went off and was involved in the American Civil War. Dixon was involved in the Battle of Shiloh. Now, here's a story for you. This is a family story. According to the family, when Dixon left, his girlfriend, Queenie Davis, gave him a a gold dollar piece, and said, "You bring this back to me when you come home." Okay? So he goes and he's in the Battle of Shiloh and he's injured. But he's not killed. And of course, what does the family story tell us? Anybody? Yes. What's that? Of course. The family story would have to be that while he was in this battle, the bullet that struck him, his life was spared by this gold coin, as the family would tell the story. Well, Dixon, after he recovered, got involved in a project to create something called the CSS, Confederate ship Huntley, which was actually the first submarine used in battle. And he was an engineer kind of by trade, and he worked on that, and he was involved in getting that set up. And as a matter of fact, he ended up being the commander of this. It went out, it sank on February 17th, 1864. It sank the USS Housatonic, took it to the bottom of Charleston Harbor. And then the Huntley disappeared. Never seen again. Nobody knows what happened to it. Until the late 1990s and early 20th century. It was raised on August 8th, 2000. Now, what's interesting about this? Well, first of all, when that submarine sank, the clay in Charleston Harbor was very, very fine silt, and it immediately filled up this cavern of this submarine. So when they raised this up and brought it to shore and started emptying it, what they found in there was all of the seamen fully clothed. They had been completely preserved. After they were removed, they were buried in a Confederate cemetery. And as they were cleaning this out, George Dixon was in there, and much to their surprise, everyone's surprise, this is what they found in his pocket. What is this? It's a gold piece, and it's warped. And if you look carefully on it, it has an etching on the back. It says, Shiloh, April 6th, 1862, my life preserver, GED. You can pass this around. Now, before you ask the question, no, this is not the original one. I wouldn't be handing that to anybody if it was. But when they did an analysis on that, they found that there was lead on the surface of it, and you can see it is clearly warped. The story was true. And that's kind of an important thing, in that what you find are that oral tradition, family stories, it can be quite old, can be true, and you can learn a great deal from them. So there's an image of it, and I can't remember her name that found that. But you can look it up online. There's a lot of stuff that's been posted about that. So, all right. So I have like 20 minutes left with you guys. And now this is where it's going to really get kind of fun. There are some images of me as I've kind of progressed my career. That's me right there. That's up in the Wind River Range in the Bridger Wilderness in 1988 during the Yellowstone fires. I was a ranger in the Virgin Islands for a while. I got to work with my dad. My dad worked, once I got, anyway, long story, but he came down and worked maintenance. My mom and dad came down. This is when I was a ranger in New Zealand at Battle Hill Farm Forest Park. And this is me at Effigy Mounds with a guy named David Smith, who we'll talk a little bit more about as we go on. But I want to tell you some stories about, like I said at the beginning, all I ever wanted to do is I just wanted to be a ranger at Effigy Mounds. I just wanted to live in Northeast Iowa. I didn't have any grand plans to do anything. But the world, or my life, kind of took its own track. So I'm going to tell you about something called the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. So what this is this is a bill, or this is a law, that prohibits people from making items and then claiming that they're Indian made. If you're going to sell something as being Indian made, it has to be made by an Indian. That seems clear enough, but you would not believe the amount of fraud that's out there. And I don't mean like fraud making rubber tomahawks and selling them for $2 and saying they were made by the Sioux Indians. I'm talking about artworks, pottery, all sorts of stuff, jewelry that costs thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. So there's an incentive there because a lot of Europeans have a connection and like American Indian art. So a little bit on that. Now, here's the legal side of stuff. When you have a law, you have to meet, if you're going to prosecute somebody, you have to meet the elements of the law. And here are the elements of this law. The defendant did knowingly offer or display for sale or sell a good. So knowingly, that means that they knew what they were doing. They knew that the law existed. And so that's an element. They falsely suggest that the product is Indian made and they reside within the United States. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Penalties, up to $25,000 and not more than 12 months in jail if it's $1,000 or less. $250,000 or in prison not more than 5 years if it's over $1,000. Okay, now here's where it gets kind of interesting for me. There's a guy named Andrew Red Horse Alvarez. We had a report of that he was not an Indian and that he was selling things as being Indian made. So myself and an FBI agent named David Keiss went to this art show in, was it Albuquerque? I think it was in Albuquerque. Santa Fe. So we go there with the idea that we're going to buy some things from this person. So we go and we visit with the U.S. attorney beforehand, and he says, I want you to buy $2,500 worth of stuff. Why does he want $2,500? the penalties, right? He wants this as a felony, not as just a serious misdemeanor. He wants this person to be potentially penalized, going to jail for up to 5 years and fine of up to $250,000. So that's what he wants. So we go to the show. Now, the FBI officer, David Keiss, and I, we'd known each other for quite a few years, but we weren't like really good friends, you know? So it's like, okay, how did we want to do this? I said, you live here. I was living in Iowa at the time. I said, why don't we just talk about that our dads were in the Air Force together, you know? And I'm on this pilgrimage to kind of go where my dad went. He said, yeah, that sounds fine. My dad was in the service, so that sounds good. And my dad was in the Air Force. So we go into this show. We go to this guy's table, and we engage in a conversation. We tell him about this is what we're doing. You know, I'm on this pilgrimage type thing, and wanted to get some American Indian artworks. And are you Indian? Oh yeah, I'm Colville Apache, I think he said. Okay, cool. And so we talked more, and I said, you know, when I was a kid, I went to some national park and I bought something. It said Indians something on it, and it turns out it was made in Japan at the time. I said, that just didn't seem right. How do I know that I'm being looked after? And he goes, well, there's the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. So, knowingly, do you think we have knowingly in here? When he's telling me about the law, we're good. So, anyway, we go through and we have this conversation. We're there talking for like an hour. And, well, I'll have this and I'll have this. And, of course, as I told you before, I'm not the mathematician, but I do know how to add up to $2,500. I'm saying, okay, we'll get this, we'll get this, we'll get this. And there's this really cool bracelet. And I'm like, oh, my dad would really like that. He goes, well, I made that for a woman. I said, well, my dad is a very small man. It'll fit him perfectly. He's like, okay. So I get to like $2,600. And all right. And so at these art shows, to make sure that the vendor who runs this gets their cut, they fill out a little slip, and then you go pay the central desk. And then later on at the end of the day, he goes and gets his cut. So it's like $2,600. Okay. And as he's starting to write this up, he goes, you know what? He goes, this has just been so nice talking to you guys. I've just enjoyed this so much. And by the way, we get photographs of all the stuff laying out with our arms around each other. You know, we're buddies. He said, this has just been so cool. He said, I'm going to knock $300 off the price of this stuff because this is, you know, no, don't do that. No, you don't have to do that. No, I am. So I'm going back. Can I use some light profanity? I'm going back to pay for them. Going, oh shit, you know. So I go back. I pay for it, $2,300. Come back, and David is standing there, and I said, do you realize what I've done? He says, well, I was kind of wondering. And the guy's like, what did you do? I said, I bought all this stuff, and I didn't buy a single thing for my wife. I'm going to be sleeping in the doghouse if I don't buy something for my wife. What do you got for around $400? All right, well, we got this over here. Okay, so then we buy that, and we're good. Things that you don't expect to happen. So anyway, he eventually pled guilty to this charge, and yeah, that was a success. And the importance of a law like that, you can say, well, what difference does it make? For people, some of the people that I was involved with in this, they might make 3 bracelets a year that sell for like 10 grand each. And one couple, I remember very clearly, the wife called us and said, you know, my husband's stuff isn't selling. And we went into, I think this was in Santa Fe maybe too. And she said, went into the store, and here's copies of his stuff that are coming out of the Philippines. Somebody had bought one and sent it to the Philippines, and they were mass producing it and saying they were made by this artist. And so their income went from, you know, $30,000, $40,000 a year to zero because they couldn't sell anything. So a law like this is kind of like, it's a fence at the top of the cliff versus an ambulance at the bottom. And so it's really rewarding if you get a chance to get involved in something like this. You can make a difference in individual lives, and it's a good thing. Anybody know where this is? Come on, you guys, you're from here. Yes, the Marching Bear Trail at Effigy Mounds National Monument. So now I've got a couple of Effigy Mounds stories now that will use up the rest of our time, but it involves Luther College, and Luther College played a really, really important part of this story. And I'll try not to cry, because sometimes I do. So Who's a good reader? Who's a good reader here? Who would be willing to read? Will you, please? All right. Can you just read that?
It's a quiet Tuesday morning in early March. You've just made your rounds through the park, had your morning cup of coffee with the locals, and have settled back into the comfort of your office. No sooner than you get settled, your superintendent, boss, walks in. Jim is new to the job. He seems a bit geeky, but lucky for you, he is smart and appears to be a pretty straight shooter. He comes into your office, the color drained from his face. It looks like he is about to inform you that your oldest child has died. Instead, he greets you, and as he sits down, he hands you this.
Thank you. He hands you this report. It's known as the Henning Report, and it's called the Accession History and Status of Accession Materials at Effigy Mounds National Monument. Okay, did you do it one more time? Yeah, all right. You're my man.
To which you answer, no. He says, read pages 1 and 2, to which you see the following. Human skeletal remains from the accessions in the museum collection at Effigy Mounds National Monument were deaccessioned in 1986 and 1990. The disappearance of the skeletal remains became apparent at EFMO and resulted in a series of correspondences early in 1996, the general conclusions of which was that the remains were unaccountably missing. I asked Superintendent Miller to initiate just one more search early in March 1998. That search was performed, but no remains were found.
So this is the Henning Report, written by a guy named Dale Henning, who was a professor here at Luther College. He was my advisor when I was a student here. So look through this. There's a lot of stuff missing. 41 people. 41 people were taken out of the park. So what do you do? And I'm asking you, what are you going to do? Yes. You're going to quit. Well, what's that? What? 41 people are missing. I'm going to try and find them. Anybody else? Okay, so here's a little bit of background as to where this goes. So I had a suspicion about this. And my suspicion was based on having a conversation with a former superintendent. Remember I showed you that picture in 1987 of me going off to work at Effigy Mounds? Well, the superintendent who was there at that time, I became friends with. Actually, I knew him for a long time because his daughter and I went to school together. But he had said something kind of strange to me at a funeral a few years earlier, saying, a number of years ago when we moved out of the park, there were some animal bones that were collected on this site. They ended up in a box. And when we moved out, they ended up at our house. Wonder if you could come get it. And I like, yeah, but and there was a number of other things going on in the park. I'm like, this isn't the time for these to be these animal bones, because first of all, the site that he was describing wasn't even in the park. And I read this report and this part, and I get this sinking feeling and like, holy hell. So, long story short, I go over to his house, and we go out and look around in his garage. I don't find anything right away. He calls me the next day, hey, I found this box. Come back, take this box back to the park and open it up, and there is the skull of a child, like looking out at me. And yeah, so you have that. So then we kind of start now knowing, okay, where did these human remains go? Now, here's the interesting part about that. We called the regional people, they came in, they went through everything, and they said, yep, everything's there. But making a long story short, everything wasn't there. Less than half of it was in that box. So the regional person didn't lie to us. They just weren't truthful. Everything in the box was there. Yes, everything in the box, but not everything missing. And there's a whole, you can pull this up online and look at the story on this. But so in the midst of this, and just keep moving on with this, we'll circle back to it. Jim Nepstead, he comes across, he's reading some memos because we're trying to figure this out, and he finds this memo where Kate Miller, who is a later superintendent, says, I really got to talk to the tribes about something really important about a significant find. And Jim is like, oh, this is it. This is about the human remains. I said, no, this is something else. And here's where Luther College comes back into the picture. Does anybody recognize her? Lori Stanley. Lori Stanley was a professor when I was here. She just retired a couple years ago. If you get it, and she teaches a class occasionally. If you get a chance to take a class from her, she's one of the most wonderful people that you'll ever meet. But Lori did a paper on what Jim was thinking was the human remains. I said, no, what you're talking about are the sacred stones and the Ratcliffe points in the sacred stone. So what is that? Well, there's a guy named Ellison Orr who, in northeast Iowa, back in the 1940s, got in his car, and he was into looking at artifacts and collecting artifacts and that sort of thing, and he wanted to go take a picture of this, what was known as a sacred stone with some rock carvings on it. And so him and another guy, and he got a couple of young boys who liked to collect artifacts to ride in the back seat of the car, and they were going to go along with him. So these young boys hop in the car, they go down along the upper Iowa River in Almaquee County, and they go to this stone, which I will show you a picture of in just a second. And the boys are out in the cornfield, and Mr. Orr, he's with a guy named Dr. Henry Field. Field looks down, and he sees a clamshell kind of sticking out of the ground, freshwater mussel. So he digs it out, and notices that it's two halves that are put together backwards. He's like, oh, this is odd. And he's going to open it up. He doesn't. Then he's going to throw it away, and he doesn't. And he says, I bet you the boys would like to look at this. So he throws it in the back seat of the car, and when they come back, they open up this clamshell. In amongst the muck are 7 little points and 2 clamshells. So I'm going to read you some stuff here. Let's see. So Lori, So Lori, she decides she's doing a paper on this. And she gets a group of American Indians here to look at rock art sites from all around the upper Midwest. And she's showing this slideshow, and she talks about this. And she says, I began by having a slideshow of rock art sites in the area, providing everybody an opportunity to see them. I ended the presentation with the sacred rock, showing slides produced from Orr's photographs and artifacts found there. As I project the image of the 7 points and briefly related the story of their discovery in 1944, an eerie silence fell over the room. When I finished speaking, the spiritual leader and his wife took me aside with urgency in their voice and asked where they could find these 7 sacred stones. They said, we have been looking for them. Resisting the temptation to ask the many questions that their words evoked, I simply replied, as although I had not seen them myself, I thought I knew where the 7 points and their clamshells might be. They implored me to confirm their whereabouts as soon as possible. Later that day, I took the group to the sacred rock, where I witnessed an outpouring of emotion like nothing I had ever seen before. At the time, I did not understand the reasons for the Winnebago's tears of joy, but I was deeply moved by the experience and resolved to do what I could to help them find them. The 7 stones represent the 7 sacred ceremonies of the Ho-Chunk people. And this belonged to their tribe, and they had literally, for 200 years, been digging under rocks in Wisconsin looking for this. So if you're familiar with the Christian faith, think of the Ark of the Covenant, okay, and the Ten Commandments. We're kind of there. So now here's the interesting thing. When they got down to effigy mounds, the clamshells are on display in the museum as examples of clamshells. So that's kind of like if you go to a Christian history museum and the Ark of the Covenant's there. Here's a really cool example of a wooden box. You know, it's outside of when the context is lost, it's kind of diminishes the true value of that. But here's where the story becomes interesting. They could only find 5 of the points. 2 of them were missing. So David Smith, who I showed you that picture of before, he and I were talking about this, and I said, look, I'm really sorry on behalf of the United States. We've managed to lose 2 of the most sacred things that you guys possess. And he looks at me with this kind of strange look. He says, what are you talking about? I said, well, we've lost them. I said, well, and he goes, no. He goes, we're just not supposed to have them yet. They'll show up. And I'm like, man, I've worked for the Park Service at this point for like 25 years. These babes are gone. You're never going to see them again. Well, guess what? In amongst this investigation of the human remains, they show up. And they play a big role in kind of figuring out this mystery about the human remains. Now, how does this all tie together? There's the stone. The human remains we eventually recovered, and there was somebody on the inside in the park who was covering this up, who actually had hidden the 2 points, breaking the 7 up as well. When the Park Service, when the superintendent back in 1990 got rid of the human remains, what they did is they filled out a property surplus form, board of survey form, and they took these people and they marked them as abandoned. And they abandoned them, and they went into his garage for 20 years. So we did get them back. They were repatriated. Now, how does this kind of tie into Luther College? Well, in addition to Lori Stanley, the person that wrote that report, what was his name? Anybody remember? Henning, the Henning report? Dale Henning, who was a professor here. Remember those 2 boys in the back seat of the car? One of them was Dale Henning in 1944. So you have these cycles that connect things together. I am just about at time. There's another picture of the stone with my boys. And I'd just like to end with this. Why? Because look in the background. There is New Zealand. And there is like Shagmouth is right in that area right there. So this is the last place that we settled on Earth, right here. And this is during the construction of the space station. These are our first steps off the planet. And so this is the direction that we're going towards going forward. It can be quite scientific. But then, is there any Star Wars or Star Trek fans or Star Wars fans in here? Qui-Gon Jinn, Darth Vader, Darth Maul. There are people like that. Right there. That's one of the favorite images I've ever seen. My lovely wife Sharon took that. Cody is featured there as Qui-Gon Jinn throwing Darth Maul and Darth Vader off into the distance using the Force. So anyway, I'm over by a couple of minutes, but thank you so much for letting me come and talk to you. And before I do finish, I just want to point out, so you've been sitting here going, why are we here? Like I've said a couple times, I never expected this. I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to be a ranger at Effigy Mounds. But the world has treated me really well. I've got to do really interesting things. I was not a great student. The last anecdote I'll tell you, I gave a talk like 10 years ago at the World Bank, okay, on this sort of stuff. At the top of my notes, I put a fraction, 131 over 172. What does that mean? That's where I ranked in my high school class over in walk-on. Why did I put that down? I put that down for 2 reasons. Number one, if I did really good and I was feeling like, man, I'm really smart, man, I know there's 130 people still smarter than me. But then again, if I had really screwed that up, I'd look at that and say, well, I still know there's 42 people that are dumber than I am. So humility mixed with a bit of curiousness, you have no idea where you could go. And I encourage you all to explore those areas. And while you're here at Luther College, explore opportunities that present to you. Because like I said, I can't believe when I look back and putting this together, I'm like, oh my God, I'd forgotten half of this stuff. And so you've really added something to my time because you've made me think about my past, and I appreciate that. So I'll stick around for any questions, but again, thank you all for being here tonight, and good luck with the rest of the semester, and have a good spring break. If I don't see you, hopefully I won't. So, thank you.